is actually my lucky number. I graduated 13th in my high school class, so I consider that a very lucky number. So while we're kind of waiting for that to load up, just a couple of quick announcements. The exam is up, and hey, no quiz this weekend. And don't forget that your homework assignment number 5 has been moved to next Friday. So don't worry if you don't understand what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to. We haven't gotten there yet. And so just to kind of let you know, we'll have time to kind of talk that over next week and work on it when we talk about logic and reasoning. So this is going to be I will say logic and reasoning is probably one of my favorite sections to talk about, but for some of you, it's going to be a little weird because we can argue that ghosts exist and that will technically be a logically valid argument. You're like, Dr. Gilchrist, of course ghosts exist. What about Vera? I'm like, yeah, I know about Vera, and I'm not going to knock Vera because I don't want the ghost coming after me. I'm already scared of the Babadook. I don't need anything else. I just saw it last weekend. I'm like, I don't want to go in the dark. That's where the Babadook lives. Let's see what we got. Review session on Monday? I think so. And I think we're probably going to finish this up on Monday. So we might actually have time to review in class. Fingers crossed. If not, I will make a review session probably for Monday night. All right. So I want to go back. To those questions that I asked you last time. Sorry, I get really excited talking about probability and making decisions and stuff. So here's where we left off last time. So I gave you these 3 scenarios. So first of all, in scenario number 1, we're going to flip a coin. I'm going to pay you $200 for flipping a heads up coin. If it's tails, you owe me $100. Why not both? Well, I'll see how much we cover, because if we cover everything on Monday in the review session, there's not need to have another. But I'll be pretty thorough, I promise. And then whatever I don't cover, if it turns out we only get part of the way, I'll make like a 30-minute session that we can finish up with, that I can record for you. So scenario number 2 is a sure gain of $800 or an 85% probability of gaining $1,000 and a 15% probability of gaining nothing. And then scenario 3 was a sure loss of $800 or an 85% probability of losing $1,000 and a 15% probability of losing nothing. So I asked you to answer each of these questions, and we would come back to talk about them today. So here's my question for scenario 1. Go ahead and put this in the chat. Tell me what you said to the first scenario. Who is going to say yes if you play or no if you don't play? Okay, so Geneva's going to play. Okay, let's see if anybody else. Tori says no. Maya says no. Emma says no. Okay, Robin says yes. Ash says yes. Okay, so how about the second scenario? We'll talk about each of these in a minute. So scenario 2 is a sure gain of $800 or an 85% probability of gaining $1,000 and a 15% probability of gaining nothing. So let's call the sure gain. So did you either take the sure gain of $800 or did you pick the risky gain? So tell me either sure gain or risky gain for scenario 2. Okay. Tori says take the sure gain. Maya says the risky gain. Ava says the sure gain. Emma says the risky gain. I'm going to try to get my straw under my scarf mask. Okay. So we're a little bit more split on this. Robin, what did you say? Sure gain or risky gain? Risky. Okay, risky gain. Ash, also the risky gain? Okay. So now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it with a loss. Would you rather take the sure loss of $800, or would you rather take the risky loss with 85% probability of losing $1,000, or a 15% probability of losing nothing? So either the sure loss or the risky loss. Okay, Emma says sure loss. Ava says risky loss. Tori says sure loss. Maya says a sure loss. So how about over here? Sure loss or risky loss, Robin? Risky. She takes risky. Ash? Sure loss. Okay. Geneva takes a risky loss. Okay, so let's talk about what normative theories will predict in each of these cases. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off stop share because we have to do a little math, but I'm going to do the math for you. So there's no math that you have to do for this. It's all me. So let me go ahead and I'm going to zoom in so that you can all see the chalkboard over here. Let me go ahead and get that straightened so you can see more of the chalkboard. Yeah, I know, I look like a video game character with my scarf mask, but it's also very, very cute. When we're doing normative theories, so when we're talking about normative theories of decision-making, we are always, always, always talking about maximizing utility and minimizing loss. So normative theories basically say that you should pick something that's going to help you maximize your gain. Hey, Brianna, thank you. So here's how we kind of do this. So if we want to figure out whether or not we should play, a normative theory says we should do this. So folks, what is the probability that we get a heads up coin? 50%, okay? So we multiply 50% times the $200 payout, right? So this is if we get heads up. Y'all actually need to be able to see that. There we go. And then what we also have to do is we also have to calculate what will happen in a loss. So we also have a 50% chance of a tails up coin, and that is you paying me $100. So when we work this out, that is $100 minus $50. So when you work through the math, if you play the game, you have a net gain of $50. That means that if you play this game, because you get more money with a heads up than you lose with a tails up, ultimately you should choose to play. But people do not want to play this game, right? Nobody wants to play this game. So let's go to our risky gain and our risky loss. So we basically gave somebody the option. I'm gonna change this just a little bit so I can see the slides and do the math. Okay, let's close the chat. There we go. Okay. So the next option is a sure gain of $800 and an 85% probability of gaining $1,000 and a 15% probability of gaining nothing. So, and of course the eraser is right over there. So I'm gonna go get it. Hopefully you heard that noise. Okay. So when we're doing this one, we're going to calculate the chances here. So our sure gain, we know for a fact we'll get $800. What will happen with our risky gain? So let's do some more math. Yay. So we have an 85% probability of gaining $1,000 plus a 15% probability of gaining nothing. So this is basically works out to 850 plus 0 equals a net gain of 850. Now, of course, the probability doesn't always work out in your favor. So I have a feeling odds are that if you picked the sure gain, you picked it because you want to make sure that there's always a chance that you get money versus a 15% chance where you may not get anything. But you should actually pick the risky gain. You're going to get more money that way. By and large, you're going to get more money that way. And now let's kind of do the same thing with our risky loss. The same kind of thing applies. So here we have an 85% probability of losing $1,000 plus a 15% probability of losing nothing. And once again, that works out to a net loss of $850. You actually will pay more with a risky loss. But I bet the reason that a lot of you picked the risky loss is because that 15% chance that you may not have to lose anything looks very attractive in comparison to a sure loss, despite the fact that if you take the risky loss, 85% of the time, you're going to be paying out way more. But the chance of losing nothing is attractive to people. People are very highly motivated by the opportunity, by the chance to avoid a loss. And we'll talk about that because ultimately that's what drives a lot of decision making. So that's it for Dr. Gilchrist in math. Thank you. All right. So we're now back on. Can you all see me? Can you see the screen? Are we good? Okay. You'll let me know if you can't. Okay, fantastic. So now let's talk about basic decisions. So we kind of talked about what the best choices here are. The best choices are the following. In scenario 1, we worked this out. You should play the coin toss game. In scenario 2, you should take the riskier gain because you will get more money that way. And in scenario 3, you should take the sure loss because you will lose less. But we often don't make the best choice. Now, what I actually appreciate about all of you is that you all gave different answers. There was a lot of variability in responses. Some of you did want to take the risky gain. Some of you wanted to take the sure gain. Some of you did want to take the sure loss, and some of you wanted to take the risky loss. Let's talk about what most people do. And because obviously we're a really small sample size, but what we find is that most people will not bet on that coin toss. About 2/3 of participants will not bet on that coin toss. And additionally, most participants take a sure gain. They pick the sure gain and they choose the risky loss. So here's what people should do. Here's what people actually do. So are we kind of starting to get the idea that I was beginning to impress upon you on Wednesday, that we are not that rational? Because we're not. And really doing what I'm about to do is not either. I look like I'm eating this. Like I'm like, this is like my monster mouth. And I'm like, oh. Here we go. Okay, so prospect theory. Let's kind of talk about prospect theory. Do you need me to go back, Averiana? I'm sorry. I get so excited talking about coin flips and probability. It just rocks my world. And I'm actually really proud of myself. I did kind of want to let you know that I was about to pull up my calculator and do math. And I was kind of scared. Yes.
We have a prospective student that you're going to come sit in the rest of the class.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Just take a seat that has a, well, actually, we don't really have the stickers anymore, but feel free to sit kind of in the back because those spots are not taken by students.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So if you have any questions, let me know. We are talking about decision making today. So hopefully you enjoy that. Okay. And so, by the way, I think next week, I think we only have a handful more blog posts to put up, but I believe that the next one is about language, and the title of the blog post is Let's Eat Grandma.
Yes.
Let's eat grandma, or let's eat grandma, talking about kind of the nuances in language. All right, you good? Sorry about that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about prospect theory. So prospect theory prospect theory is in direct contrast to normative decision making. So normative decision making, you're basically doing what I just did. You calculate the probability of different outcomes and you pick the one that best works, the one that gives you the greatest benefit. Now be honest, how many of you actually do that? No, none of us really do. Oh, you kind of do, Robin? You're also really, I think we've discovered that you're also really good at calculating probability. So I suppose if you're really good at it, you should do it. But most of us don't do this. Most of our decisions are made with our intuition and with a couple of guiding principles in mind. We are not 100% rational decision makers. And so this is where prospect theory comes into play. So the main assumptions of prospect theory is first of all, we identify a reference point representing our current state. Now, I bet if most of you had if you were not broke college students, and I realize that not all of you are broke, but I also remember when I was a college student on financial aid, and even though I had a full semester's worth of financial aid, it sure wasn't much. And I know for me, if I didn't have a lot of money, I sure as anything would not be betting on coin tosses, even if the payout works in my favor. I'm not going to be gambling on coin tosses. So we often will identify a reference point that represents our current state. If you don't really have a lot of money, you're probably going to be more justified in trying to keep whatever money you can get, and you're probably going to play it safer. But something that also is a really important part of prospect theory is this statement: losses loom larger than gains. This is also referred to as loss aversion. When we are making decisions, we are far more motivated by potential losses than we are to potential gains. The fear of loss for many of us is more important than the fear of success. More of us are afraid to fail than we are in succeeding. Now, there are people who are legitimately afraid of success, but far more of us are afraid of loss or failure. So how does this relate to our earlier findings and to how we make decisions? In general, we prefer sure gains versus risky gains where we may not get anything. And additionally, if there's a way for us to avoid a loss, no matter how small, even if it's only a 15% chance, we'll take it. And thankfully, most of the decisions that we make, like what mask am I going to wear today? Or what kind of coat should I wear today? Most of the time, these do not involve potential losses or gains or things like that. I will say for me, wearing gloves this time of year is really important. I get dry eczema hands, and if I wear gloves, it makes them better. But generally, most of the decisions we make don't really hinge upon these things. Like, we don't think about what losses are in play if we have a peanut butter sandwich for lunch. And thank goodness for that, because I eat a lot of peanut butter. Okay. Anybody need some more time? Okay. So here are some basic decisions. So according to normative theories, we should follow what is called the dominance principle. And generally, the better of two similar options should be preferred. So again, I'm going to have you choose between a few different options. Don't worry about normative theory. Don't focus on probability. Just focus on what feels right for you. So we're going to choose between these two options and then these two options. So we're going to choose between a sure gain of $240 or a 25% probability of gaining $1,000 and a 75% probability of gaining nothing. So choose between A and B. Then I want you to choose between C and D. You either take a sure loss of $750 or a 76% probability of losing $1,000 and a 24% probability of losing nothing. Okay, Tori says A and C. Maya says A and C. How are we kind of feeling over here, y'all? Okay, Ava says A and C. Okay. So y'all want sure gains and sure losses. Over here, what do we think? Now, so here's my question, and this might be kind of important for your next exam. Oh. Usually if I mention your exam with a question, it's kind of important. Okay, so according to a normative theory, which one should you pick? What should you pick if we're doing the normative theories? You should pick B, and you should pick C. So according to normative theories, you should pick B and C, and here's why. When you work the math out here, this leads to a net gain of $250. So that's more than $240. So you should pick B. But I think for most of you, you see that 75% of getting nothing, and you're like, no, not doing that. You here, between C and D, you should pick C, because you will end up losing $760, which is more than a loss of $750. So according to normative theory, you should pick B and you should pick C. You know what most people do though? They pick A and D. They pick the sure gain and they pick the risky loss, because that 24% probability of not losing anything sounds really good, even though there's a greater chance of losing even more money. So keep this problem in mind when you're preparing for your exam. It's a short answer question. And it's on the study guide too, so it's not like it's a closely guarded secret. Well, I hope you all have a very nice weekend. It is going to be kind of rainy tomorrow, but it should warm up throughout the week. We have a couple of days. By Thursday, it will be a balmy 70 degrees. The more time I get outside, the better. So definitely enjoy it. We're not going to be as cold as we were. Like I said, wait until February. So where are y'all coming from today? Hey, that's not too far of a drive. Very nice. Say hi to Andy's for me. No. I'm vegan, so I can't really have Andy's anymore, but say hi to Andy's for me.
They have a, icy or whatever.
Yeah, but those aren't the same. They're not the same. All right, is everybody good? Does anybody need some more time? Adriana, you need more time? Okay, you good? All right. All right, so let's talk a little bit about loss aversion. So people have actually done a lot of research into why people make the decisions that they do. And obviously, your current reference point, if you don't really have a lot of money, you are going to be a lot more sensitive to potential losses, and you're going to be more likely to pick sure gains because that's your current reference point. We also know that there are individual differences in loss aversion. So Joseph's and colleagues basically did find that people that tend to have lower self-esteem are actually more likely to take a less risky gamble. And here's why. So one of the things that we kind of find, so I promise this has a point. So I'm going to preface this by, I promise this has a point. So I'm reading a book, well, technically I'm listening to an audiobook right now called The New Science of Narcissism. And they're talking a lot about self-esteem and positive self-concept. And one of the things that we know is that when you have really good self-esteem, you actually tend to be a little bit more overconfident in your abilities and in your judgments and things like that. When you tend to have lower self-esteem, or if you're struggling with depression, we actually know that you have a greater tendency to see things as they really are. And so people who are in low self-esteem, who have lower self-esteem, they might accurately be able to assess the losses and the gains and choose accordingly. And we do also know that they are more sensitive to loss of, they're more sensitive to these potential losses. Now, something kind of related to this that demonstrates how loss averse we are is something referred to as the sunk cost effect. So the sunk cost effect is basically when we expend additional resources to try to justify a previous commitment that isn't working. And one of the reasons that I really love talking about decision making is that I know we're talking about goofy coin flips and gambles, but let's be honest. How many of you have a situation, whether it is, in my case, a bummy car, or maybe you have a friendship or a relationship, or something that you've put a lot of time and energy and possibly money into, and things aren't really working out? A lot of the things that we're talking about in this section have direct applications to everyday life in ways that you probably wouldn't have imagined. So I'll talk a little bit about the sunk cost effect. I'll talk about my car. So for those of you who may not know, I have a white Ford Fiesta hatchback with heated seats, which is part of the reason why I bought it, named Taylor Swift, because the Taylor Swift song came on when I drove off with the car. So I said, okay, that's your name now. I named my cars. But prior to that, I don't know if anybody here remembers, I had a bright electric blue PT Cruiser that I had had since 2010. And I finally paid off the car. And just like magic, once you start paying off the car, that's when all the problems start. And it finally ended up about 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago to this point. I was in Florida to go to a teaching conference and to visit family over the Christmas break. And I had to pay $800 for a whole new braking system. And then not even 2 days later, my thermostat died and almost stranded me in Tupelo, Mississippi. I actually had to miss the first day of classes because I was driving home and my car died. And I was like, okay, that's it. I've put in over $2,000 trying to fix this car this year. It's time to get a new one. So that's kind of the sunk cost effect. We keep putting money into a car because we're like, I've put so much money in already. I just paid it off. You know, how many of you have had a friendship with somebody that wasn't that great, but you kept going on with it because we have history? I've put so much time in. I think we can all think of at least one example where we've done something like this. I know I have. So here's kind of a more mundane example. Now, let's be really clear. Let's pretend you don't have COVID in this case. So you put in a non-refundable deposit for $100 for a hotel over the weekend and you start to feel sick. Let's say it's not COVID. Let's call it your run-of-the-mill cold. So you begin to feel sick. Are you going to stick it out and go, or are you going to stay home? Who is going to stick it out and go to the hotel? Let's see. Who would go to the hotel? Ash, you'd go to the hotel? You'd be in a nicer place with a bed that you don't have to make. You'd be sick, you'd be miserable, but at least you wouldn't have to clean up after yourself. That's what I think about. It depends on the place. It depends on the place. So who would go to the hotel and who wouldn't stay home? Oh, I can move that for you, Rihanna. There you go. So you can write. Okay, Maya says she's going to the hotel. Let's hope it was a fancy hotel. Like if you're waiting to go to like the Econo Lodge, maybe that's a little different. Unless it's a really nice Econo Lodge that's like right next to a Culver's, that's not so bad. Stay home. Ava says stay home. And I think that depends too. Like again, let's think about our reference points. For y'all, is $100 a lot of money? Yeah, $100 is a lot of money. And because of that, you really want to feel like you didn't waste that money. But I think it kind of depends. So sunk cost is something that we all do at one point or another. Okay. So most people decide to stick it out. When you ask people this, most of them decide to stick it out because people don't want to feel like they wasted their investment. That's why when you're having a bad relationship with a friend or a romantic partner, you're like, I don't want to leave. We have a history. I've put all this time in. I've put all this energy in. I don't want to feel like I've wasted my time. And I would argue it's not wasting your time. You're learning something. Never feel like you wasted your time, because you didn't waste your time. You were learning and you were growing. Yeah, it is sad, but a lot of people do it. You know, it is sad. People do that though. You know, it's hard. And one of the other things that we do find too is that there's greater accountability. If there's more accountability, that becomes even stronger. That sunk cost commitment ends up becoming stronger if you have to document things. So if you had to book this hotel for a business trip and you have to document all of your purchases and what you did, you're going to be more likely to engage in that sunk cost effect because somebody is holding your decisions accountable. So you're going to actually be more likely to do it. Okay, I'm sorry. This existed before COVID, these questions, but let's kind of go with it. We're going to talk about how the way we frame things can really mess with loss aversion. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry. There's a virus outbreak in Nevada. Yeah, we know. We know. We know. It will likely kill 600. Okay, this is a fake virus. This is not COVID. Just, I'm promising that's a pretty high rate for a city of 8,000. So I'm pretty sure it's not COVID. You have two potential programs of action. Program 1 allows 200 people to be saved. Program 2 has a 1/3 probability that 600 people are saved and a 2/3 probability that none of the 600 are saved. So who is picking program 1? Who is picking program 2? Okay, we got hands up. We got quite a few for program 2. Program 1, program 1, program 1. Okay, so, oh, something popped on the chat. Let me see. Program 2, okay. Program 2. So a lot of you are saying 2. Now, when you do the math, it works out the same. When you do the math, the overall net works out the same. Exactly. 1/3 of 600 is 200. But here's the catch though. Most people tend to pick program 2. And here's why. 1/3 probability that all 600 are saved. So framing, as we're about to see, is going to be really important here. So even though in terms of sheer probability and net gain, program 1 and program 2 are equivalent, people by and large prefer program 2 because they want the possibility for all 600 people to be saved. Now let's flip it. There's a virus outbreak in Nevada. It will likely kill 600 people. You have two potential programs of action. Program 1 will lead to 400 people dying. Program 2 has a 1/3 probability that no one will die and a 2/3 probability that 600 will die. And again, the data is equivalent. Now here's what's interesting, and most of you picked program 2. Most people pick program 1 here because again, sure gain versus a risky gain. But here, as soon as I flip it from people being saved to people dying, people shift to program 2 because now we're talking about loss. So most people are going to prefer that risky loss. They want that 1/3 probability that nobody's going to die. I have a feeling that most of you would either pick, when we're talking about saving, most of you went for program 2. I'd wager most of you would probably go for, well, how do we feel about this one? Most of you would, so would we still pick program 2 here? Okay, some people definitely wouldn't. Okay, I wanted to say one, but felt bad. Yeah, there's no easy way to say, yeah, let's let 400 people die. That sounds terrible. It absolutely does. And in terms of numbers, these are equivalent, but most people here are apt to pick program 2 because of the possibility that no one will die. Yeah, it's basically the trolley problem. It is absolutely the trolley problem in a lot of ways. And I would argue that if we're talking about people that you know versus random strangers, I think that loss aversion becomes even greater. So one of the things that's been really interesting, and I know, and I'll try not to get too bleak on this, but okay, so a lot of lives have been lost in this pandemic. Do you remember how scary and sad it was when it was just a handful of people? And now we've got over 200,000 of them. And it kind of goes back to that Dunbar's number issue where your brain cannot just abstractly process over 200,000 people. It's very easy to become numb to that because of how abstract it is. Anyway, that's bleak. I'm sorry. Okay, so wording matters. Wording matters. When we this is what's known as the framing effect. Decision-making can be influenced by irrelevant aspects of the situation. When we're talking about positive framing, when we're talking about people being saved, the majority of people pick the sure gain. When we talk about loss and people die, most people pick the risky loss. And this shouldn't happen if it's on the basis of utility. You should do a very basic probabilistic outcome and be like, program 1 and program 2 are equivalent, pick either one. But people don't do that. Now let's kind of bring it back to more mundane and less upsetting matters. How many of you drink 1 or 2% milk? Okay. Can I ask somebody why they drink 1 or 2% milk? Why don't you drink whole milk? Ash, why don't you drink whole milk?
I'm not supposed to have a lot of fat.
Okay, you're not supposed to have a lot of fat. Okay. Well, why don't you drink skim then? Skim's got none. It tastes like water, doesn't it? It's kind of weird. Now, I grew up in a 2% house. And when I ask people, hey, why do you drink 1% or 2%? Why not whole? And they're like, whole milk has so much more fat than 1 or 2%. It really doesn't. The milk fat content, if I'm not mistaken, for whole milk is about 3 or 4%.
It smells weird to me.
And that's
It really
fine.
tastes like thick.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, if it's too thick and you can chew it, that probably means it's gone bad and you shouldn't have it. But we get the idea that because it's 1 or 2%, that whole milk must be so much higher. It's really not. It's only a couple of percentage points, but we get this idea that because of how it's framed, that something's a healthier choice. Likewise, when you hear that your beef is lean, you'd rather hear about the lean portion of your beef than how much fat is in it, because lean makes it sound healthier. It's part of, like, I got to tell you, the pork campaign has done a really good job with that. Pork is red meat. It is red meat. I'm sorry, folks. But you wouldn't know it because it's marketed as the other white meat. So people think that pork is healthier than it actually is because it's white meat. No, it's red meat. I'm sorry. White meat comes from chickens and turkeys and birdies. So framing matters. Think about this too, the next time you go to Kohl's. Who loves the deals at Kohl's? Everybody loves the deals at Kohl's. I love talking about this because everybody's like, I got such a good deal at Kohl's. So one of the things that's interesting is if you look at the tags, they usually tell you what the suggested price is, but they almost never sell it at that price. It's always less. And that makes you think you're getting a better deal, and you're actually going to be more likely to purchase it. We do actually find that people are more likely to purchase a coat if they know it's been marked down to $50 than if they just buy a $50 coat. It's like you're getting a better value. You're not somebody will come in with money they got with goods that they got from a sale at Kohl's. They're like, look at all the money I saved. You just bought a bunch of things, which is the opposite of saving. But they think they got a good deal, and that's how they get you. Having said that, I do love a good sale. I did just buy an iPad on sale, so I'm a huge hypocrite. Okay, so let's talk about the role that emotion plays in all of this. Emotions can end up making us much more loss averse than we would be otherwise. So Kermer and colleagues basically had a bunch of college students play a card game. Some people actually got to play the game, other people got to watch. And so after a gain or a loss, the players would rate how happy they were. And if you were observing, you were told to predict how happy you would be if you had played. So here's what's kind of interesting. So they looked at what happened after a loss, and they also looked at the differences between winners and losers. And here's what's interesting. After a loss, people who were observing actually reported being less happy than the people who actually lost. So the people who actually lost in the game didn't really feel all that bad, but observers had to basically predict how they would have felt after a loss. And they're like, oh, I would have felt so bad. And the actual losers are like, whatever. And that's going to bring up a really important point that I'll bring up very soon. We are really bad predictors of how we're going to feel in the future. We're really bad at it. Additionally, you would expect that winners would feel happier than losers, but it turns out that there's no emotional difference. They're just happy to be playing. It's only a game. Like, I play Quiz Bowl with a bunch of friends every Tuesday night on Zoom, and am I bothered when I don't get a question right? Yes, sometimes, especially if it's one that I should have gotten, like a psychology question, and especially if somebody beats me to it, because that's my area, dang it. I never feel bad for losing a game. It's just a game, and it's for fun, and it's not serious. But if I were watching and asked to make predictions about how I would feel, maybe I would rate that very, very differently. And that's because we are very bad at predicting how we're going to feel in the future. So for example, when we got started this semester, I was like, oh, I'm going to be so scared and so anxious and so swamped and so busy all the time. And I can't speak for other people. I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. We really underestimate our ability to adapt and adjust. And that's not to say that some people aren't having a hard time. They absolutely are. But we don't often give ourselves enough credit for our resilience. So I kind of gave this example to my general psych students last week when we were talking about stress. Do y'all remember your first breakup? And it is the worst feeling in the world. And I remember my first big breakup, and I remember feeling like this was the worst pain, and I was going to feel this way forever. I was like, this is just so unfair. Like, I'm 18 years old. Like, this is so unfair. I'm just going to feel this way forever. I didn't. Things got better. It wasn't the worst thing. We severely underestimate our resilience. We severely underestimate our resilience. Having said that, though, I'm also a big believer that if it's a problem that you've been trying to navigate and you're still having trouble coping, I'm a big believer that everybody should go to therapy. We all have problems that we cannot navigate on our own. Every single one of us. And it always helps to have an objective soundboard. So if you are struggling this semester, and I know quite a few of you have been, feel free to talk to somebody. We've got peer listeners, we've got counselors. I am not a therapist, but I am occasionally willing to listen. Okay, so we're going to stop here. So let's talk about this before we go. You generally overestimate your emotional state. So here's one of the things that you may not know. Your emotions are incredibly fleeting and they're caused by your brain. So you don't always have a lot of control over them, but I can tell you what you do have control over. You control what you choose to do with that. You control how long you tend to dwell on that. So stop me if you've heard this one, because this is something I do all the time. I wake up in the morning and just for whatever reason, I'm like, I don't feel good. Today is a day I'm gonna feel bad. And it's just an emotion. I could probably have a cup of coffee and perk myself right up, but no, that is not what I do. I go on the internet and I look at things that make me mad or make me feel worse. And then I'm on edge and odds are pretty good. I'm gonna work my emotion out on somebody else, which you should never do. Don't work your baggage out on other people. Don't work your emotions out on other people. So we have a choice in choosing to we have a choice in terms of how we choose to latch onto it and make our emotion last longer than it needs to. We generally are poor emotional forecasters. So emotional forecasting is predicting how we're going to feel in the future after an event occurs. So what would happen if your relationship ended? How would you feel if you lost your job? Oof. I would probably lay on the floor for 6 months and do nothing. And odds are pretty good I wouldn't. I say that. Odds are pretty good that I wouldn't. We are bad emotional forecasters. We tend to overestimate the intensity of our negative emotions, and we also tend to overestimate the duration of our negative emotions. Although some of y'all are getting better at it, I asked the general psych students how bad they thought they would feel, how bad they would expect to feel if they had a romantic relationship breakup, and one of them was like, 1 week. I'm like, good for you. Good for you. I was more like, it'll take me a year or maybe 6 months. And it's probably closer to like 2 or 3. So generally, we're not very good at this. So something to keep in mind, don't underestimate your ability to handle things, and do know that you can get help if you need it for whatever things are troubling you or are burdening your emotional state. So we'll finish up our discussion of decision-making next time. We'll talk about maximizers and satisficers. I hope you are intrigued. We'll talk about how we make complex decisions, and hopefully we'll have some time to review. If we don't have time to review in class, I will have a review session that I will record for you later that evening. Have a wonderful weekend. Make good choices, don't lick doorknobs, and I will see you on Monday.